Tuli?
No, that's not the real me. That's what Goethe said as he was dying. Wait a while. That's ominous. I've always admired Taylor Mead for his disorganized and unrehearsed shows, and for various reasons, this may be an imitation of him. I'm going to do a parasong by Ed. You know, parasong is a song to someone else's earlier melody. And the song is titled Further Verses from America the Beautiful. The original words were written by Catherine Lee Bates in 1893, right on Pikes Peak. She had admired the view, and she wrote the lyrics we all love and admire. How many of you know this song? Well, you'll know Ed's song. In 1904, it was set to music. She incidentally was a Congregationalist pastor's daughter, and also managed to be a professor of English literature at Wellesley. 1904 was set to music by Samuel A. Ward, who also wrote church music, and to a melody that goes back to another church hymn that goes back to Scotland in 1650. I learned the song myself almost 70 years ago at public school 70 Manhattan, just a few miles north of here on First Avenue. And if this is still the world, this will be a world premiere. Oh, beautiful for the catalpa flower and sunflowers in the field, monarchs on the milk wheel pods to mark the bounty's yield. America, America, come sing your song of grace, for every hue beneath the blue, and every creed and race. Oh, beautiful for prosperity that reaches every land, and water pure, cascading free, and health care in every hand. Oh, bountiful America, be glad of eternity, and may your dreams stand in the stream across the galaxy. Oh, beautiful for the airplane ride that sails above the plains, and farmlands glide, and deserts bloomed with rains. America, America, God bless thy great largesse, and every town find full renown, and every wilderness. Oh, beautiful for the inventiveness that purrs near electric streets, and freedom of the voice and press, the dawn of sharing greets. America, America, may you build sanctity and see your dreams stand in the stream for all eternity. Oh, beautiful for towering ships that speed the Milky Way, may peace imbue those starry trips where peaceful humans play. America, America, let justice forge your stay, and spread no harm nor foes alarm across the spiraling bay. Oh, beautiful for an end to war, an end to class and strife. Bring freedom rides where no one hides the truth in every life. Now I'm going to do the trick that Pete Seeger always do. I'm going to give you each a line, and you're going to sing, or else we're going to throw you out of here. Oh, we have to do America, America. America, America, come sing your song of grace. Come sing your song of grace. For every hue beneath the blue. For every hue beneath the blue. And every creed and race. And every creed and race. You will find all the lyrics on the internet at Ed and Miriam's new Woodstock Journal page. That's www.woodstockjournal, one word, .com, right? Yeah. And also featuring Miriam's wonderful nature columns and other great stuff. And I'm still collecting parent songs for the 5th edition of my songbook, Listen to the Mockingbird. My address in Manhattan phone book are on switchboard.com. So all you don't have to be a poet to do this. You don't have to be an artist. Even I can do it. Okay, thank you very much.
Whoops, there goes Papa Suso in the back room to tune up the choral. What's going to happen next? I don't know. Well, I know what's going to happen next. Ed Sanders is here, and we're celebrating his birthday. We're also celebrating the release of Volume 3 of America, A History in Verse. At last, we're getting the real story, and Ed is the poet to do it. So please welcome Mr. 65.
Well, I'm a little bit overwhelmed. Bob called me a few months ago and suggested we do this. I really didn't know what to say and sort of ignored it for a while, and I acquired stature. I'm really grateful to see so many friends I haven't seen in a long time, and I'm grateful to be still alive in a marvelous part of the Milky Way, and in a marvelous country for all its ups and downs. I came here, I hitchhiked to New York City in 1958 with $35 and my father's suitcase to go to New York University. I went immediately to the Gotham Book Mart and spent almost all of my money. I went to room 903, I guess it was, or 901 at NYU in September, and met a young woman in Greek class called Miriam Cattell, and she's my wife, and there she is. That was 1958. My mother had said a gentleman knew Greek and Latin, so I decided to study Greek, and Miriam did too, and we met. So I'm here to celebrate my birthday. It's also the release date of Volume 3 of America, A History in Verse. It will be a 9-volume history of the United States in verse. I'm starting with the 20th century. Volume 3 covers the 60s. It's very accurate, and if you want it, it's like a refresher course for those interesting years. It covers the years 1962 through 1970. So I'm going to read a little bit from it, and then I'm going to do a song for Allen Ginsberg. I'd like to thank, of course, Bob Holman, for my old pal, for many, many years, going way back, for hosting this. And also, I'm involved in a film project, the film of the book Tales of Beatnik Glory. My agent, Jim Fitzgerald, who just got me a nice deal with Thunder's Mouth. All 4 volumes of Tales of Beatnik Glory will be published by Thunder's Mouth in either late this year or early next year. And then there's a movie happening. The writers, the script writing team is here, Vincent Fremont and Shelley Dunn. I helped write it. It will be produced by John Killick, who's a very, very well-known producer. So that's happening in my life. I'm grateful to my friend Tuli whom I knew as a teenager hitchhiking from Missouri as a beat hero. He was in all the anthologies. His picture was in the beat scene, and he was in the early, I think he was in the Evergreen Review. And I first saw him outside of the Charles Theater in '61. The Charles Theater on Avenue B is where they had all the avant-garde films. Ron Rice in his green shoes, Taylor Mead, and of course Jonas Mekas hosting Underground Film, '61, '62, and that's where I first met Tuli Kupferberg, and then opened up a bookstore right next to his house on East 10th Street later in '64, so one of the great songwriters of America. It's Tuli Kupferberg. So, I have, in the spirit of Bushonomics, I have copies of my Tales of America 3, and also a couple of Fugs albums. I'm going to read a little section from 1969, because it was a similar era. You had a rising anti-war movement that was forcing Nixon to realize that he could not expand the war. And that's probably what's going to have to happen if Kerry wins in November. We're going to have to remind him that the war has to end. So I'm going to start out after July 20th at the Sea of Tranquility, when Neil Armstrong said those remarkable lines, that's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind. That was on July 20th, and I began on July 21st. Come Together, July 21st. John Lennon and Yoko had invited Tim Leary to come to Montreal for one of their bed-ins for peace, to help in the recording of Give Peace a Chance. Leary had announced he was going to run against Reagan for California governor in '70, and Lennon asked what he could do for the campaign. Leary suggested a song, and Lennon began a tune based on Leary's campaign slogan, Come Together, Join the Party, which evolved into the Beatles' hit, Come Together. It took the great group just 7 hours on July 21st to record the basic track at Abbey Road. 10 years for Two Joints, July 28th. 2.5 years after poet John Sinclair's arrest for rolling a couple of joints from a brown cookie crock to give to an undercover cop in Detroit who was pretending to be a volunteer for the committee to legalize marijuana. Sinclair was sentenced to 10 years in prison, one of the most famous and unjust sentences in the 1960s. The Clearwater arrives at the mouth of the Hudson, August 1st. It refers to the Cuyahoga. The Cuyahoga River in Cleveland had caught fire in June of 1969, just as some wild ducks were landing, and fate had these ducks landing right in the flames, and they were perished. It was not quite as bad as the Cuyahoga in Cleveland, which actually caught fire back in June. But the Hudson River by '69 was oil slicky, smelly with chem waste, littered on its shores with the dreck of largesse, and used as a toilet bowl by cities great and small. The great songwriter and banjoist Pete Seeger decided with his wife Toshi and many friends to begin the healing of the Hudson. It took 3 years of reaching out to the public. Seeger gave hundreds of benefits and raised about $100,000 himself. But the campaign also included, to the chagrin of a few of Seeger's leftist pals, reaching out to rich sailboat enthusiasts and those with Hudson River estates to raise almost $200,000 to build the 106-foot sloop, the Clearwater, at a shipyard in Maine. At last, the Clearwater made its maiden voyage from Maine, packed with Seeger and the Hudson River sloop singers, till it passed through the Narrows and docked at the Statue of Liberty on August 1st, where New York's impressive mayor, John Lindsay, came aboard and took a turn at the tiller. Then it sailed up the Hudson to begin its great work for the rest of the century and beyond. It was a moment for America. Peace and Love at a Dairy Farm, August 15, 17. More than 400,000 came to Max Yasker's farm in Bethel, Sullivan County, New York, for the Woodstock Festival, and heard some of the best popular music groups of the century, including Richie Havens, Joan Baez, Crosby, Stills, Nash & Young, The Who, Janis Joplin, Jefferson Airplane, Santana, Country Joe and the Fish, John Sebastian, and of course the great Jimi Hendrix with his heart-rending national anthem in the closing set. There was a drenching of rain and oodles of LSD, pot, nudity, fucking, and communality, and the birth of the freak-out tent. And Abby Hoffman coming up with the concept of a Woodstock nation with free food, free health care, free music, free fun. A nation that still exists, like a faintly burning coal in the stalk of Prometheus. For free has a power that awaits its rightful centuries. The New Mo, 69. A new national mobilization to end the war in Vietnam was formed after the Chicago riots and began to work on two huge upcoming late '69 moratoriums. September 2nd, birth of the nuke net, later the internet. 2 hefty computers were connected by a short gray cable, and test data were flowed between them in a lab at the University of California, LA. The birth of the computer network called ARPANET that would later become the internet. It was a Cold War project, at first forged by the Defense Department for secret and secure communications, able to survive in the aftermath of a nuclear war and its forestless, melted, eyeball nuclear winter with no telephone lines. Ridenour moves on My Lai, September. Ron Ridenour had been in Vietnam and learned of the My Lai massacre and began in a huge investigation and public outreach to make it come to the public. In early September 1969, Lieutenant William Calley was charged for the My Lai massacre. Ron Ridenour thought Calley would be the scapegoat and no other officers charged. He said later at a conference he had felt, quote, there were 2 massacres, and Lieutenant Calley was one of many officers who, albeit too enthusiastically, followed orders. So Ridenour began his campaign to reach out to the press with his knowledge of My Lai, and it worked. Quote, suddenly, several weeks later, there was Cy Hirsch. We connected, and he took off from there. I'll leave out a long section on the secret 6-year bombardment of the Plain of Jars in Laos. Came public in September. Chicago 8 trial, September 24th. The Chicago 8 went on trial. Dave Dillinger, Rennie Davis, and Tom Hayden of the National Mobilization to End the War. Abby Hoffman and Jerry Rubin of the Yippies. John Freunds, a chemistry teacher at the University of Oregon. Lee Weiner, a grad student at Northwestern. And Bobby Seale, chair of the Black Panther Party. All indicted for the rider placed on the 1968 Civil Rights Act, the so-called Rapp-Brown Amendment. Bobby Seale demanded to represent himself and to cross-examine witnesses. His attorney, Charles Gary, had to have surgery, but the judge wouldn't postpone the trial. Seale kept interrupting proceedings till finally Judge Julius Hoffman ordered Seale bound and gagged. And there he was in court, like someone shackled in a ship's hold. Richard Nixon weighed in with his usual sour-souled analysis in one of his secret tapes. Aren't the Chicago 7 all Jews? Davis is a Jew, you know. When someone told Nix that Davis wasn't Jewish, Nix noted that, well, Abby Hoffman's Jewish. Then I'll pass over the Ellsberg during '69. Daniel Ellsberg was reading the 4,000 or 5,000 pages of the Pentagon Papers, which was the secret history of how we got into the war in Vietnam, how the nation got into it. So he was studying them. And this was '69. He would not release them to the New York Times until February of '71, almost 2 years later. Moratorium Day in D.C., October 15th, '69. There were 2 big demonstrations that fall called Moratorium Days across the nation. The first was on October 15th. They had a kind of religious power, though Nixon pooh-poohed any thought that the demonstrations would change his course. Yet in his later memoirs, he wrote how the peace movement made him stop scheming for a wider war. Quote, I knew, however, that after all the protests and the moratoriums, American public opinion would be seriously divided by any military escalation of the war. Effete corps of impudent snobs, October 19th. 4 days after the first moratorium, a human being named William Safire, known for soaking the era with his clever bile, cobbled a speech for Vice President Agnew to deliver at a Republican fundraiser that spoke of the moratorium as, quote, encouraged by an effete corps of impudent snobs who characterized them as intellectuals. As for the second moratorium, the bribe-taking Mr. Agnew mouthed Sapphire's words that, quote, hardcore dissidents and professional anarchists were plotting wilder, more violent demos. Sounds like next week. October 21st, that morning, Jack Kerouac was watching the Galloping Gourmet TV show, making notes in a pad and eating some tuna from a can when the blood from a burst vein bubbled from his throat and he passed from earth. March orders for the era. Well, while I'm here, I'll do the work. And what's the work? To ease the pain of living. Everything else, junkin, drunken, dumb show. That's from Allen Ginsberg's elegy for Kerouac. I'll pass over the taking of Alcatraz, very interesting sequence that came right in between the two moratoriums. A group of, mainly inspired by the Chippewas that set up the American Indian movement, but a whole group of American tribes who had not had any pollination or cross-correlation took over Alcatraz and kept it for almost a year and a half till it was taken back. The second moratorium, November 15th. At least 250,000 demonstrators came to Washington to instruct the military-industrial surrealists it was time to halt the murder. I was there, and the memory is exquisite of clanging the Justice Department doors while chanting, "Bring out your dead, bring out your dead," and looking up to see wasp-eyed Nixonites staring from the upper windows. Establishment figures such as Senator Charles Goodell, George McGovern, Eugene McCarthy were on hand, and also Peter, Paul and Mary, Dick Gregory, Leonard Bernstein, plus the thrill of standing there in war-stopping triumph while 250,000 sang "Give Peace a Chance." Nixon ignored the singing. He was watching a football game, while 40,000 walked back and forth in front of the White House, each holding a card with the name of American dead in the war. And then I'll pass over the horrid killing of Fred Hampton in Chicago right after the moratorium, where a group of leather-wearing Chicago policemen that looked like Nazi stormtroopers kicked open, and he had been drugged and shot him to death. All because he was a good organizer, and he was certainly not violent. December 6th, Mick Jagger of the Rolling Stones was just beginning the tune called "Sympathy for the Devil" at a big rock fest at the Altamont Speedway in Livermore, California, when a young man named Meredith